Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Shed Talks. This week we are looking at the really important topic of financial well-being. Professor John Hoffmire is a research associate at the Centre for Mutual and Co-owned Business at the University of Oxford. Prior to that, he was the director of the Centre on Business and Poverty at the University of Wisconsin. He has over 20 years experience in equity investing, venture capital and investment banking, and is now chair of the Personal Finance Employee Education Fund and also chair of consulting firm Cadence Innova. Before we hear from Professor John, just a quick mention that we've put together a really useful free resource for employers and employees, covering topics including facts about furlough, managing debt, everyday budgeting and pensions. Simply drop me an email here and I'll send you a free copy of this really helpful resource. Also, a quick reminder to please subscribe to this channel to hear of future episodes that we've got coming up. So without further ado, let's hear now from Professor John Hoffmire from the University of Oxford. So good morning, John.
Good morning, Francis.
So welcome to the Shed. Thank you so much, John, for giving up your time today. I really do appreciate it. And I know a lot of viewers, and certainly I'm really interested to hear your views and your experience around the topic of financial literacy, financial well-being, especially at this time when I think of all of the topics, that is one that is really at front of people's minds currently. Could you just unpack a little bit, John, the research that you've done around particularly financial stress and the impact of stress and finances, how that impacts us as individuals, and some of the work and research you've done about that? That'd be really helpful.
Well, there are two parts of my research. One is case study based, and the other is fairly quantitative, having to do with a survey. On the case study side, I think it's really important, the word you just used, which is individuals. And especially in these highly stressful times, there are so many individuals that are having real difficulties financially. They're having difficulties with their mental health. They're having difficult times with their general health, not just having to do with the coronavirus. Often when people have financial problems, they end up having real difficulties with their general health. The survey, which is called the Personal Finance Wellness Survey, is a quantitative tool that's been used now we're into the high hundreds of thousands of times. It's probably the gold standard of surveys in the financial wellness world. In fact, many of the viewers of this video will be familiar with the question that asks, if you had to come up with £1,000 within the next month, would you be able to do so? That's our question. And there have been different variants of that used by President Obama and in countries all around the world.
Sure.
So we find both from the case studies and from the surveys a great deal about how people are actually behaving, how they're feeling, and whether or not they're able to cope in these type of situations.
Right, that's really, really interesting. In terms of that particular question, so I know a lot of research has indicated that I think it's about 11.2 million people plus in the UK that have less than £100 in savings. What was the rationale behind that question? How did you come up with that question as a barometer for financial well-being?
We wanted to show that, in fact, the financial wellness issues that people face are not just problems of poor people.
Sure.
When you look at the statistics of how many people in, I call it the middle class, I guess we use the word working class here, which often can include middle-income people, there are huge percentages that don't have the resources to deal with their car breaking down, for example. If there's a major repair, often people lose their work because they simply can't make the repair. They may have missed a few days of work and they're gone. So we find that by using a question that actually broadens the topic, that it's easier for policymakers. It's also easier for employers to understand just how many people are suffering. And it's often over 70%, depending on which developed country you're dealing with.
Wow, so over 70% of an employee base at any one time may well be struggling, suffering with the mental health challenges associated with financial stress, and also the very practical reality of financial stress and managing day-to-day budgeting and financing and generally coping. That's significant. What do you think organizations can do? So an organization has conducted this survey. They've identified the cohorts of their employee base that are really struggling. What can organizations do to help their people? I mean, there's a lot of debate about how far organizations should go. Obviously, we provide employee benefits and we provide employee assistance programs and support in that way. But where do you think employers' responsibility is to help their employees, and what practical steps can employers take?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you just an incredibly brutally honest answer here. And I want to preface this just by saying that I will always stand with the poor. But as I answer your question, and I say that the first thing that corporations need to do is to understand that helping all of their employees in these type of situations is in their best interest. And when I say their, I mean the corporation's best interest. Sure. There's been a lot of work done on return on investment around financial wellness issues. And when corporations do the right things for their employees, they often end up profiting from that in the long term. So that recognition of that it's the right thing to do financially for the company as well as the right thing to do for the employees is the first step.
Okay, and having recognized that and got that business case that this is going to be good for the organization, it's going to be good for our people as well, what kind of practical things can organizations do?
Well, I think, and you started into this as you started talking about individuals, but you need to segment your population. So if your employees are spread across all different generations, all different races, have ethnic backgrounds that are as diverse as most employers in this country and employers in the United States, for that matter, even employers in China, have diverse populations. If you understand their demographics and then can tailor your programs to make sure that you're dealing with, for example, the issues of the ages for people, and this is somewhat obvious, but you'd be amazed at how often people don't do this correctly. If you segment toward looking at what older people need, they need to understand what's going to happen when they retire.
Sure.
For people who have university-age children who the parents might be trying to help with their university costs, helping an education that informs those parents about what to do is important. If you have younger people who might be looking at buying their first home or having their first child, the education needs to be around those topics.
And can I just pick up on that, Professor John? You've used the word education there a number of times, and I've read a number of articles that suggest that education does work, and others suggest that financial education is not the silver bullet. What's your view on financial education and then financial intervention, support and help? Where does education fit, and how effective is it really?
Well, I'm just going to use one word here and then elaborate. My one word is both. So there needs to be education, and then there also needs to be nudge. And I think many people who are listening and watching today know what nudge means, but I'll just give a brief definition. So nudge means that to a degree, you take the decision-making out of people's hands, and you create structures and systems that really push people to make the right decisions. And so the great example in this country has to do with UK pensions, where going back to the time from 2012 until 2018, there were major reforms made, which really pushed both employers and individuals to make financial commitments. And the only way they could get out of that was if they opted out of the programs. So essentially, nudge means put people in, and then if they want to get out, they actually have to take steps to get out, as compared to you always have to sign up for something. Of course, when people have to sign up for something, they're less likely to do it. And because we're all lazy, and I put myself in that camp as well, it's much more beneficial to society when you make people take the step to go and figure out how to get out of something than it is to have them sign up originally.
Great. And yeah, so you're right. I mean, auto enrollment has had a huge impact on saving, and it's just relying on that principle of default. You default people into something, they have to make an active choice to leave it. So there's a combination there of education, because people need to understand what a pension is, and they need to understand, for example, the impact of their contributions today on their long-term savings pot. But also we need to help them along that journey by using behavioural science and nudge theory and other tactics, engaging communications to make the whole topic interesting. Because let's face it, if you try and educate people about tax or about ISAs and pension and all these different terminology, it can be quite a boring topic, let's face it, for many people. So a whole range of techniques we can use to do that. On one, and I said it was one final point, but this really is the final point around budgeting, just as we finish on this topic. Our view at Gallagher is that setting a budget helps, right? Personally, if you have a budget, if you can see income and outgoings, it's better than being an ostrich and burying your head in the sand. What evidence is there from your work that actually having a personal budget, even if it doesn't tell you a very good story, that having a personal budget written down is helpful?
What you see is that financial stress goes down about 40%.
Wow.
When people have budgets, and that's a considerable number.
That's incredible.
And often, I think it's important to recognize that the world of fintech right now is bringing us tools that everybody can access. Almost everybody has a smartphone right now. The ability to just go online, find a budgeting tool, and use it is a dramatic innovation that people should use. And for those that don't like technology, then even doing something as simple as using envelopes and putting cash in the different envelopes that'll be needed for rent or food or whatever is a very useful budgeting tool that many thousands of people use successfully in this country.
That's brilliant. Really, really helpful. We'll certainly be providing access to some budgeting tool as well for listeners. So that's very, very helpful feedback. Professor John, thank you so much for your time. There's one really final cheeky question I've got, and this is specifically, I just reading on the Oxford University Kellogg College website. It's quite a mouthful, that, but your profile as research associate, and it suggests that you've visited over 90 countries and spoken in 90 countries. Well-traveled, obviously, but if there was one country that you could visit tomorrow, where would you go and why?
That's a great question. I would go back to Guatemala. I lived there when I was 19 years old after an earthquake, and I was doing some construction work, rebuilding. And I fell in love with the people in the village of San Lucas, Toliman. So I would go back to that land of volcanoes and beautiful smiles.
I'm just imagining it now. That must be a fantastic place to go to. I'd love to go there one day as well. Okay, well, look, Professor John, I'm looking forward to meeting again in person. Thank you again so much for your time on this talk. I'm sure that so many have found the tips that you've shared there extremely helpful. And all the best, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.